Today, I have two ladies, Ruth and Dawnel, and we are talking about a heavy subject matter. But I don't think it was a heavy podcast, which I think is really good. We are talking about suicide today, suicide prevention. Dawnel is an attempt survivor and now has dedicated a lot of her life to improving mental health for herself and for other people. And Ruth's mother committed suicide. So she is a suicide survivor also, I guess, in a different way. And I don't know. I just wanted to talk about this topic. I think that we have a lot of people at home in COVID feeling depressed, hopefully not suicidal, but feeling depressed and feeling down, and maybe having thoughts like this. So I thought it was good to talk about this from the perspective of Dawnel, who has survived attempting, and from the perspective of people who have survived having lost people, because I've lost a couple people from suicide, and obviously Ruth lost her mother. So I don't know. I think it's just an important conversation to have. So I hope you enjoy it. I mean, enjoy is a strong word. Learn from it. How about that? I hope you learn from it, because I learned from this episode, as I tend to do from most of my conversations. So I hope you learn from it too. Even though it's a heavy subject matter, I think it's a very important one. So thanks for coming back every week. Just a reminder, the resilience-based parenting, I have 2 scholarships available. The link is in my wifeotp.com under my links to great things, or links to good things tab. What'd you say?
Link is also in the description below.
Oh, and the link is also in the description below. If you'd like, there's a clear path from that link on how to sign up to get a scholarship for resilience-based parenting. And what else? We're working on our book club. I think next week we'll have a book club meeting for The Last Bookstore, written by my friend Brooke. And yeah, I guess that's it. I hope everybody's doing well. And thanks for coming back. I hope you learned from this episode as much as I did. And take care of yourself and take care of the people that you love. Hope you enjoy.
I'm ready.
Ruth, are you ready?
I'm ready. Always ready.
All right. Yeah. So I know neither of you have been on my podcast before, but have you listened to one of my podcasts before? Just curious.
I have.
I have not. I will for sure.
Totally. Well, you have to listen to this one now.
Well, yes, but I will listen to more.
My whole point, one of my main reasons for starting this podcast was to learn. I'm a super curious person, and learning is really important to me. And this is going to be a learning episode for me. I'm going to preface all of this with, I believe this subject to be very serious and to be very serious. But I am a humorous person filled with levity. So if I ever have a moment of joking, I don't want anyone to think that I don't take this very seriously, because I do. But levity heals so much. So if we can find some way to, if people listening can just have that perspective that I'm here to learn, and that it's okay sometimes to laugh at hard things, if it's natural.
Well, both of you have met me, so we know that's all in.
Yes, no problem there.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I could not. That is so, everything you said just completely speaks to me. So I am all in, like she said.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. So then let's jump right into this heavy duty subject matter. What are we talking about today, ladies?
Talking about suicide.
Yeah.
Suicide loss, suicide prevention, suicide awareness, just suicide.
Just the whole burrito.
Mm-hmm.
The whole burrito.
The whole burrito. So tell everybody I'm talking to you specifically. How are you connected to suicide? What's your story? What do you do now?
I'll go. You want me to go?
Sure.
I met Leanne through her dogs. And I recently was asked to give a group of moms a suicide prevention and awareness talk because they were worried about somebody in their kids' circle. And through that, Leanne asked if I could come on and speak about suicide. My personal story is that I lost my mom to suicide when I was 19 years old. So I was a sophomore in college, and it pretty much derailed my life and everything I thought my life was going to be, mostly because my family never talked about it. So 30 years later, I had my own little mental health crisis in a Target, little panic attack. And that sent me into a depression, which made me start looking into all this. And I realized that as much as the suicide was a huge part of my issues, more it was the not talking about it and kind of suffering through this all in silence. So since then, it's kind of become my mission just to open up that conversation. And I'm actually, I my background's in television, but I'm doing my first film right now. And it's about me breaking the silence with my own family in hopes of inspiring others to do the same.
So brave.
Thanks.
That's really brave. Okay, Dawnel, tell me your story.
Okay. I'll try to shrink it, right? Because
no need to shrink.
There's so many chapters. I am a product of the biology. And so mental health struggles and suicide, in fact, are something that is a history in my family. I have lost my grandmother, who was at the time my absolute best friend. I have lost other grandparents. I have lost friends. And I am actually a suicide attempt survivor. And
wow.
Like Ruth said, for so many years, there was no discussion within my family. In fact, for pretty much my entire childhood, I didn't even know the real reason or the real circumstances of my grandmother's death. I was told that she got sick and passed away. And it wasn't until I was 16 that my mom finally opened up and explained what actually happened. And I am so thankful that she did, although once that discussion took place, that was the end of it. There was no other conversation around her story or around the struggles that were, a long line of that in my family. So I silently suffered for many, many years and not understanding it. And like you said, now looking back, I see how critical education is and really just understanding it. So my first real dark place took place just between that, finishing out my teenage years, becoming, an adult, and circumstances led up to my attempt. And I am so very grateful and so blessed that my purpose here on earth was not done. I had not discovered what that purpose was. So I am an attempt survivor, and I've continued to struggle for many, many years. With my second child, my son, I was diagnosed with severe postpartum depression, but I didn't get that diagnosis for almost 3 years after he was born. So many, many days of just, pushing away those feelings and pushing away that darkness and faking fine, putting on a smile. But in reality, inside, I was absolutely dying in every sense of the word. So it happened to be on a good day, actually, that I decided I'm going to educate myself. I want to know what this is so that I can figure out how to deal with it. Mm-hmm. So I quickly hit Google, of all things. And the first thing that popped up was the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And they were having a community walk that weekend. So I registered, I recruited a couple friends, had no idea what I was in store for. And I met Ruth. I met a tribe, a community of people that just understood. And it was like, I remember standing in the middle of the park, just overwhelmed, but in all the most beautiful ways, crying, saying, I found my people. They get me.
Right.
And that was it. I called the director that afternoon, said, you don't know me. I was at this walk and use me. How can I help? How can I volunteer? And since it has opened so many opportunities, I'm now an educator with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. So I've had the opportunity to work with junior highs, high schools, and colleges, as well as the school districts and parents. I'm a certified life and health coach with a focus on mindset and just mental health as a whole. And I just locked arms with the first ever mental wellness company, Amari Global. So I'm a wellness partner and trying to get their message out of an all natural holistic approach to mental health. When I say I live, eat, breathe, sleep, mental health, I do. And so does my family.
That's great. There's so many things I want to talk about in what you two have just brought up. One is your tribe. How important is it to find your tribe? I mean, isn't it, it's just transformative, right? To feel understood in a way that it's like I found my tribe out here, but not from my mental health stuff. I read one book, and I've read millions of books, well, not millions, but lots of books. But I read this one book where I went, oh my God, someone was watching my childhood and writing it down. And now I know that this is formulaic and that other people have this. You don't know my background, but I believe my mother has a personality disorder. She's never been diagnosed, but from the books I've read, that's my diagnosis. Mm-hmm. So I read this one book and I went, oh my God, that answers every single question. It's such a freedom. Is that what you experienced when you found that tribe, what you just described? Or did you feel like you were like, oh my God, I'm free?
I had the same exact experience she did. And I use the same words. I found my people because I had, like I said, I hadn't talked about it in 30 years and it never occurred to me to talk about it to anybody. I knew other people had obviously suffered the same kind of loss, but I didn't know it was a thing. Like that's something you could talk about. And also I had opened up to a few people over the years, but when I did, I always, had to explain, oh, my mom was a social worker and she wasn't able to help people any longer. And, all the excuses and rationalizations. And at the walk, the second you say my mom died by suicide, they're like, come here, and it was it's just this instant connection and no qualifying, no explaining, no anything. It was just that immediate connection. And I felt it that day. And like her, I called the director the next day. I'm like, what do you need? And I jumped all in and kind of made it my life for a couple of years.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
100%. Yeah. And I love the way you describe it. It really is like a freedom. It's like immediately all of these weights are lifted off your shoulders. Mm-hmm. And this is a community of people that there's no judgment.
Right.
Whatsoever. You can't say the wrong thing. There's no judgment. They're so welcoming and understanding. And so I think so much of my mission is to ensure that other people feel that in some way. It may not be through a walk or, but if it's through my educating or just me sharing my story, mm-hmm. because I think there is obviously such a stigma around it. And one of the messages I always like to get out is, my life from the outside looking in looks pretty darn good. I mean, I'm a very blessed person. And I remember the first time I started to really come out and share my story, I had old employees reach out saying, I had no idea. Wow. I had no idea. And so my message is we got to check on everyone because you just, even the strong, even the ones that seem to have it all together, because you just really never know. So that's really my driving force is I want other people to experience that same freedom, like you said. Absolutely.
Well, I think shouldn't it be that there's no judgment anywhere? No judgment on bipolar, no judgment on schizophrenia, no judgment on addiction. There should just be no judgment anywhere, really, because the judgment is what creates the shame, which creates the silence, which perpetuates the mental illness. And that it's like this horrible shame cycle that society has put in place, that it takes a few people, one brick at a time to go, why don't we just take that out? Why would you ever be ashamed that you were sexually abused? Why? You should not be ashamed of that. You should say, this is something that happened to me. How do I understand it better? How do I understand myself better? And how do I heal? Really, because it's very few people on the planet that don't have a broken part. Right. Very few people just
100%.
Have no broken part. I mean, it's not possible. I was talking to my kids the other day. My daughter and I were in a debate about whether or not she could do something that I felt was not safe. And we were debating back and forth and back and forth. And at some point in this conversation, I said, listen, someday you're going to start unraveling the trauma I have caused you. And I have. And I didn't want to, and I didn't mean to. And I'm trying my very best. But every single parent causes trauma on every single child, because that's just the way it works. I mean, you know, there's that one time I yelled at you that for you, that was a deal breaker. For someone else, it may not have mattered. But the point is, you're going to have it. So you may as well just prepare yourself, embrace it, enjoy the unraveling of it. Because if you can really start to enjoy the unraveling, I think it makes you appreciate yourself so deeply when you start going, wow, look at all these things I survived, or look at all these things that I figured out a workaround for. I'm pretty damn smart. I mean, if we could have society think that way instead of, I am so ashamed to tell anybody that this happened, because neither of you talked about these suicides in your family for years. I have a personal friend who died of an overdose, but I believe it was purposeful. And her mother had committed suicide, and she found her mother when she had killed herself. And her father had said, this will never be spoken of again. Your mother's name will never be spoken. And I believe fully the reason she ended up where she was as an addict was because of that one choice. We will never speak of this again. And for her, it just destroyed her. I believe that with every part of my soul. What a shame.
I mean, it does a lot of damage. In my family, you know, nobody even actually said, don't speak about this. We just kind of didn't. Like I always say, as we buried her, we buried all talk of her, you know, because I really feel like we walked away from the cemetery. The mood kind of got lighter, you know, when you go for something to eat afterwards, and people just start talking about other stuff and just never went back there. And, you know, when my sister and I finally, when I broke the silence, you know, it seems like a lot of her silence came from not wanting to hurt other people, not wanting, you know, that's one of the cliche reasons people don't talk, not wanting to pull the scab off the wound and stuff. And like, I don't think I ever felt that way, maybe really early on, but it wasn't like, I'm like, oh, daddy's going to get upset if I say mom's name. It was just like this thing, like I couldn't, it felt over and done. And just like, I didn't know what would happen. Like I wasn't scared of it, but there was just, I couldn't. And there's no explanation for it, but that's what happens. And then you're trapped inside and you don't even understand that other people could possibly feel the feelings you're feeling because you've never seen it discussed anywhere and you're not able to discuss it anywhere. So it kind of just plays on itself.
And if you don't start trying to articulate your feelings, then sometimes you can't understand them. Like I know sometimes I'm in therapy. I've been in therapy for years. Sometimes I'll start talking about something and I'll go, wait a minute, this is not about this at all. This is about something entirely different. And then you go, oh, wow, look at that. That was the bottom of that problem. And I thought it was this up here. So that's the hard part too. If you don't know what to say, it's hard to start talking. Yeah. But I think you just have to start talking.
Yeah, you do. And I think so much of the shame that surrounds it is a lack of understanding, not so much even with somebody like me who struggled, but a lack of understanding for the people that I would be speaking to. Right. They're not going to, I think a defense mechanism is to put this, you know, barrier up that you can't talk about that. Oh, what's wrong with you? But it's more like, you know what, I would really like to learn about that. That's, you know, so I think so much of it is definitely understanding for ourselves so that we can properly explain and educate others. But I think just opening up the topic more so that people who don't understand can learn. There were family members, even just a few years ago, who I never really talked about mental health with and my struggles with. And the second I just started almost unloading on them, it was like, wow, I had no idea. I didn't understand it. Thank you for sharing. So I think it's definitely a two-way street in that sense. For sure.
Yeah.
And I've never had a bad experience opening up to somebody, and more often than not, I found it gives other people permission to open up to me. And most of them will say, I've never talked about this before, or I haven't told very many people this. Right. And then they kind of tell you in confidence, but you can tell it's just like, I felt like, oh my God, people talk about this. I can talk about it. It's not so scary once you do.
Once you do, right. It's I think inviting curiosity from other people and from yourself, to invite curiosity into your mental health process, right? Because being curious is being an observer more so almost than an experiencer, right? If you're curious, you can say, what am I feeling? And why is this so strong? And why can't I articulate it? And how do I get some help for this? Is very different than, well, this feels terrible and I don't want to feel that. And this is really hard and this kind of sucks. Well, yeah, that's true. But if you can be curious about those feelings, I think you can help yourself exponentially faster than if you are judging your own feelings or afraid of them, because really all our feelings are natural, Maybe if you're a psychopath, you have a few that aren't. But for most of us walking around, fear, grief, shame, guilt, physical pain, emotional pain, that's kind of part of the game. It's kind of part of the game. So being curious, I think, for me, I shifted my mindset a long time ago from being reactive to being curious. And I'm not perfect. Sometimes I'm reactive. But that was another form of freedom, right? To just be curious instead of, well, that sucked. That's not going to be good. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I definitely, I definitely agree. And it reminds me of like the day that I decided to start doing some research, and I was finally in a place of curiosity. Like, what is this? Because I'm done feeling this way. I want to be able to cope and move forward. So I just need to learn about it. And, I did it privately, of course, but what a shift in my path. My goodness, I can't imagine had I not come to that place where I would be today.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? The shift in the path. So if someone is on this path of feeling, I have two guests here, right? I have Ruth, who experienced this from the outside, and Dawnel, who experienced it from the inside, right? So let me ask you, Dawnel, is there anything anyone could have done to have gotten you off that path when you got to the place where you were so dark you wanted to say goodbye?
At that moment, no, because I was so good at faking it and hiding my true, deep, dark feelings. I will say that I had such an amazing close relationship with a best friend. And she's really one of the main reasons I believe that I'm here today, because I was able to reach out to her and she had this ability to read between the lines. So I never actually came out and said, XYZ is going to happen, right? I didn't share a whole plan. It was really the snap of the fingers, how quick my mind shifted to that's the place that you want to go. And for whatever reason, I don't know, I picked up the call. I picked up the phone and called her and I said, I think this is it. Like, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. And I mean, within minutes, she was at my house. Thank goodness. Wow. But looking back in that time, I don't think so. And I think that's part of the struggle. There are warning signs and there are things to look for, but that's, not going to necessarily be every single case. That's not going to be every single story. And so that's why I think I'm so adamant on checking in on everybody all the time. Not just if you happen to see something's a little off or something has shifted, but checking on people genuinely all the time.
Right.
How are things going? Fine. No, really, how are things going? How are you handling the pandemic? How are you handling whatever situation that they might be in? And really trying to dig a little bit deeper and reach in, because for me, I wasn't going to reach out. I wasn't going to call anybody and tell them this is what I'm feeling. So we really need to get better as a society of reaching in and checking in on every single person, every loved one, colleagues, whoever.
I agree. I wonder too. So one of Bert's closest friends from childhood to adulthood committed suicide about maybe 6 years ago. And, I should have called him that one more time. I should have reached out that one more time. He called me and I didn't call him back. He called me, this case, he called Bert. Bert was shooting something. He was in the middle of shooting something and said, I'm going to have to call you back. And then didn't. And it was like a week later that he passed away. And I talked to my therapist about it, obviously, because it was extremely upsetting. And you have so many feelings of guilt and helplessness and sadness. I was so deeply sad that he felt he didn't want to be here anymore, because there's so much to live for. And he obviously did not agree. And that makes me feel so sad, because even just looking like at a mountain while I'm driving on the 101, I go, that's just majesty. It's just amazing. Just live to see that. Can't you live to see that? And my therapist said, when someone has made up their mind, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you could have done. And there's nothing that you could have done differently. It's just, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there are times when, you can intervene and you can help. But I also think that there are cases when you can. And, one of the things I do with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is do outreach with recent survivors. And I'll never forget, it was a family with multiple siblings. And one of the older brothers of the kid that died said, I really thought about going out there Thursday, and just giving him one more hug, or, giving him a hug. And, I just believe he'd be alive if I'd done that. I'm like, you know what? You could have gone out there Thursday night and given him the hug, and he drove back home, and Friday morning, he still could have done the same thing. Right. And then what would you have thought? I should have stayed. There's always one more shoulda, coulda, woulda. Mm-hmm. So yes, I believe, you have to do what you can to try and help someone. But a lot of times, like Dawnel said, they're not giving out the clues. How many times did he call Bert and Bert said, I'll call you back, didn't call him back, and he didn't kill himself. Right. It's just, you can't pin it on the one thing. And it's the same thing we say when people end up, there's not one trigger. It's not because they were getting a divorce. It's not because they just lost all their money. That may be the final straw on top of a lot of other multiple things. But how many people does that happen to? And they don't. Right. So that's how I have to look at it. I mean, my mom, she had a plan. She had a note, she knew what she was going to do. And I sort of felt bad. I thought about calling her that morning and didn't, but more because I thought she'd be more upset that I wasn't paying attention to being at school than I was to, whatever she was going through. Right. And that's why I didn't. So I couldn't really feel guilty about not calling it, because either way, I would have been screwed.
Right. It wouldn't have mattered.
Right.
I think that's the hard piece for people to understand. People who, I don't have suicidal thoughts or tendencies. I don't have any kind of, I've never been someone I have situational depression like everybody else. And I had postpartum, but those were very situational and very specific. I don't have a dark mood or any kind of, I don't have that. So for me, this does not compute at all. Like, it doesn't compute at all for me. So, and I think a lot of people are that way. So, you can only experience life through your own filter, really. I mean, you can try to put other filters on for pieces of time, but most people, I don't think, walk around thinking, oh yeah, he's definitely borderline suicidal. You'd have to have some pretty strong behavior, especially for our friend. He was doing great. He was working, he was writing, he was He had a girlfriend. Everything was awesome. I mean, really, for someone who has no thought process that this is even something possible, it was such a shock. Now, I did have another friend who passed away in, I guess about a year ago. And he wrote a very long letter. He had had something very tragic happen that was his responsibility. And when I found out that had happened years and years ago, I thought to myself, he's not long for this world. This fella is not going to be here. He's not going to be able to live with this. And he couldn't. And after years of trying and years of therapy and years of working at how he felt about himself because of this tragic thing that happened, that was his responsibility. A mistake, complete fluke mistake, but still his responsibility. He left and he wrote a beautiful letter. And I remember reading that letter and thinking, I don't want to say it out loud even, but I understand. I understand this in a different, for this specific person and his specific experience and the way he laid out how hard he tried to live with himself. It broke my heart so much to read that letter because, you don't want anyone to pass away, especially at their own hand. But I was like, oh my God, this poor fellow had just been suffering with this feeling. But he is someone, when that accident happened, I thought to myself, he's not going to be able to make it. And he didn't. Every year I was like, he's still here. It's working. He's working through it. And then one day I was like, oh boy, bless his heart. Yeah. So I don't know. Anyway, it's I don't know how that story is really relevant to suicide prevention.
It's trauma. I mean, it's one of the risk factors is trauma, depression, all these things play into each other. And even your friend who didn't show the signs, as a depressed person myself, I'll say sometimes when things are going well, it's a little hard to live with because you can't appreciate it. You understand everything. I'm not live with, but you understand everything's going well, but you still don't feel happy. What's it going to take for me to feel happy? I've got everything I want right now. I'm living my dream, but I still feel this way. So, I mean, I don't know, Dawnel, you can speak to your experience, but I know, it's the same thing with people trying to explain to you, you've got everything to live for. You're like, I get it. I know there's people a gazillion times worse off than for me, but the way I see it, well, at least they've got each other, or at least they've still got a family or whatever. It's like we can all play into our own grief.
So is that depression? Is that what depression is?
Well, I mean, it's part of being depressed is you don't see things clearly, or, your feelings outweigh the rational, I think. How do you see it, Dawnel?
Yeah, no, I do. And I think, you asked the question, you're not sure what that story, what the relevancy of that story is. And I think it's actually really powerful because we've got 3 people right here sharing experiences, sharing our stories, and look at how different they all are. And how different each and every person processed the trauma or processed the situation or processed their struggles or whatever. And I think that is the relevancy of it, is just how it kind of made me giggle in the beginning. You said like the whole burrito, and I'm thinking of like a 7-layer burrito. I don't know why but there's so many layers to mental health and to suicide. And so that's the relevancy, I think. So I think it's really important that you shared that because it is so different than our stories.
Right.
Yeah, because again, look at all the people that do even intentionally harm other people or do whatever the tragedy was, and they don't kill themselves. People go to jail and they'll come out and think they're God's gift and live happy lives, Mm-hmm. So it was that individual's makeup, that specific circumstance that all played into it.
One of the sweetest souls I ever knew. Just a sweet, tender fella. Just a sweet, tender, kind, giving, warm, just a sweetheart. And it was really.
And I mean, suicide's unnatural. Like, our instinct is to live.
Yeah.
So the idea that someone can do that, especially if you haven't ever ever really lived with depression or, gone to the dark side, it can be really confusing. I can see how it would be, and even in my own life, when I hear people like Dawnel's stories, I can say, like, I've been down there. I've had those feelings, but yet whatever is in me and my makeup never flipped that switch to become actively suicidal. It may be because my mother killed herself. And I said right then and there, I sort of remember saying to myself, there goes my option. Not that I had actively considered it an option, but, just kind of didn't want to be
Thanks a lot, Mom.
Or yeah, pretty much. But, so whatever, it never seemed like a choice for me. And it could just be fear. I don't know. But, yeah. So wherever I was going with that.
I have a question.
It is dang scary. It's dang scary going there. Yes.
I would imagine it's dang scary. I would use a word stronger than
it
dang.
Is.
Fucking scary.
I would. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll get to this place, but it's really interesting to me to look at the years past and what brought me to that place. I hit that dark place again after my son was born. And it wasn't until about the last, which of all times of our seasons of life, it wasn't until probably about March or April of this year that I can tell you we're in October. This is the first time in my life that I've had this many months in a row that I have not had a suicidal thought.
Wow.
See,
and I'm old. No, I'm just kidding.
That still boggles my mind, though, because even after knowing everything you do and learn all the work and research you've put in, the thoughts still come.
And I have that wellness toolkit that I always talk about, right? Like I have my coping skills. I know what it takes. And I know for sure when I get to that place, how to pull myself out. Mm-hmm. But it took all those years of exploring and educating and really trying to understand who I am and what my triggers are and allowing myself really to get that vulnerable with myself and allow myself to learn and explore. So yeah, I can tell you that I cried to my husband probably about a month ago because I couldn't believe it. It's the most amazing thing ever. But yeah, even after all of that, and even in the fact that I educate and I'm a health coach and I have all of these things. And like you said, like I have all the reasons to be happy, but sometimes I would still go to that place.
Okay. I have something to say about this. I think that's amazing. But the other piece of that, I think people listening should understand is this was a life's journey. This was not, I'm going to go to therapy for 6 weeks and I'm done. I'm going to take this one class on coping and I'm good. I'm going to go see a cognitive behavioral therapist, get some tools, not practice them and call it a day. No. That's not how mental health works. Mental health is a lifelong process. And I don't know how that's not just understood. Like you can't, especially something like what you're talking about, depression. My husband and both my children have anxiety issues. Bert's sisters have anxiety issues and his dad. You can't stick a Band-Aid on it and go, done. It is a lifelong investment and process. And it's amazing that you've come to this. I don't know how old you are, but I know that I can tell that it's taken you a few years at least to get all this stuff kind of in a completely manageable, settled way. That can be applied to depression, anxiety, to any kind of mental health, to a marriage and how you work at a marriage. That's so great that you said that after all these years. And now finally, and you have all these tools and you have all this training and still you have those thoughts. That's really important for people to hear. That even though my daughter has been to cognitive behavioral therapy, even though she practices her anxiety coping skills that the therapist gave her, she still sometimes has a panic attack she can't reel in. And the therapist said to her, sometimes these will not work.
Right.
After all these years in my life, it wasn't until 30 years after my mom's death that I really let myself go to therapy. I mean, I'd been a couple of times during immediate crises in my life, but every time they wanted to talk about her, I'm like, nope, that was her deal. I get it. I made my peace with it. Over. But, I've only been on the mental health journey of about 7 years now, and I'm not very good at it. I don't go regularly. I've been to cognitive behavioral therapy, and I still have 3 pretty much blank workbooks sitting on my bedside. I mean, I am not proactive, and that's something I struggle with too. Why can't I let myself be that person that wants to better myself, that wants to get better, or feel better, or take control of this situation? And it's a huge struggle for me still. So there is no easy fix. And, even when I started with the suicide thing, there was a good 6-month period that I was riding a high. I'm like, oh my God, I found my thing. I have my purpose. And I really did feel it. But like everything in life, it becomes part of your life. And once it becomes part of your life, it becomes part of the everything. And It's not, and yes, it's still my purpose and still a driving force for me. But, I'm not riding the same high over it that I initially was.
Right. Were you going to say something, Dawnel? No.
No, I was just going to reiterate the idea of this really being a journey. And I've talked to a lot of people. I've mentored a lot of people. And, one thing I always remind them is that this is with you forever. Mm-hmm. So right. Even as you start your healing process is going to shift and adjust over time because experiences and things in life shift and adjust. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be open arms to the fact that this is a lifelong thing that you're going to have to work through. And I try to compare it to things that I think society is more open to. So when I'm educating in schools and things, I talk a lot about how, if somebody was diagnosed with cancer, we would offer anything and everything to help them. We would do everything we could in our power to help them without judgment, without shame. We would be all over it. And that person that's struggling with cancer, even if they come into remission, it's a lifelong process. It's a lifelong journey to never get back to that place, to do whatever they can in their own power, whatever those skills are, their diet, their exercise, their stress, their whatever, to make the rest of their journey as good as it can possibly be. And I don't think there's really a big difference here between a mental health journey and a physical health journey.
No.
So I think when we can compare the two, it's hopefully that helps to, I don't want to just break the stigma. I want to shatter it. It needs to be so broken up.
I agree. It needs to be gone. Just eradicate.
There's so many things, like even cancer, though, even in physical health, like people didn't used to talk about cancer like 20, 30 years ago.
True.
They looked at it. And that's, who doesn't talk about cancer now? Same with hashtag Me Too, 3 years ago, or how long is it? I don't even know if it's been 3 years now that's really been out in the national psyche, and it's amazing what the power of conversation can do. And just, by us having this, hopefully it'll lead other people to have that conversation and, just even little bits at a time. But as long as one person is open to talking about it, it just leaves room for everybody else to come in.
I agree. There's something strong about embracing things. I like words. And if you can find a specific word that works for you about how you approach your mental health, if it's to embrace the thing that is scaring you or is difficult, if it is to incorporate it into who you are, if it is to be curious about that, to invite what's bothering you to show up because you can handle it, it just lessens the power it has over you based on how you deal with it or face it or talk about it or label it, Even to me, when I found that book that described my childhood experience with my mom, it gave me a label. And as much as you don't like labels, sometimes labels can be very effective. And you can say, this is what I experienced, and it fits under this heading in this category. And now I can handle it. But before, I didn't understand what it was, and it was everywhere. It was all over me. So now if I can get it in this little bitty place, I can go, oh yeah, I can handle that. So I'll invite you to come sit with me on the couch and let's talk about this experience I had with myself as a child. It's just a different way of thinking about tackling your issues, really. Because like I said before, everybody's got them. They may not be about suicide, but they'll be about something, So I have a question I wrote down when one of you were talking. How much do you think faith plays into mental health?
Dawnel.
Did you say how much does faith?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Faith being religion or belief in a higher power or a belief that things work out how they're supposed to, or any it doesn't have to be faith, religion-based faith. But how much, or do you at all think faith has anything to do with positive mental health?
Wow, that's
Is that a stumpy question?
Yes and no, and only because I will tell you, I have always been a firm believer that things happen for a reason, and I don't know where that came from, but I definitely believe all things happen for a reason, and I think if I'm going to label myself, if I'm going to label this health issue in my life, I'm going to label it with the word pride. And I have pride in the person I am and the struggles I've experienced. And when I started to come from a place of pride, I'm proud of who I am because I am doing really good things despite all of those challenges. It completely changed the trajectory that my healing was on, the path it was on. But I tend to be a lean into my faith person. I do. I think things happen. I do. And it works for me. It may not work for everybody. I don't know if there's really a science behind it or even a study. Actually, I might have to look that up. But for me, absolutely. I believe that I was meant to find my purpose. And I didn't even find my purpose until just a few years ago when I, found this community of people and all of that. But for me, yes, I think so.
Right. What do you think, Ruth?
I pretty much agree. I mean, I think I come from the other side of learning that things happen for a reason. I can see in retrospect how they've come together. I mean, I think faith gives you sort of that bigger picture of something, just believing in something, believing that there's a reason for something, for anything, that we're all in this. I'd say the only caveat I put on that is, when it comes to formal religion, I think, one of the big problems, it's, suicide is an international problem. There's no culture, no ethnicity that escapes it. And a lot of that is religion. That's one of the big reasons it's a stigma, because pretty much every religion has a stigma against it. So, when you say to turn to your faith leaders and stuff, if they're trained and get it, but it's hard because, religion's a weird thing, but faith, yes, I believe that believing in something and having purpose gives you a reason to live.
I agree. I think faith is a big piece of mental health, and faith can be learned. I believe it can be learned. I went to church as a child, and my mother also was very into Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, which is transcendental meditation. So I had backgrounds of organized religion or practice, but I don't do any of that now. But man, the stuff I learned from it, I draw from all the time. That this kind of like basic law of the universe comes from faith. A lot of, law of cause and effect sometimes comes from faith. It can be scientific, but also it's like do unto others as you would have them do unto you. kind of is actually true. So if you treat someone shitty, somehow shit comes back to you. So I am very faith-based in that way too. And I wonder about people who struggle with deep, dark depression, what their faith looks like. Like, do they have it? Or do they have it and it's failing them? And if it's failing them, how is it failing them? How can they fix it? I wonder, because if you have a strong sense of faith and you're feeling suicidal, how do those two things go together? Does that make sense? How can you have a strong sense of faith and still be suicidal?
Well, I think because to be suicidal is actually, if we really look at it, is more a physical issue. It's the makeup of our bodies. And that's why they say diet and exercise and all of these physical things play such a huge role in somebody who struggles with mental health. So I think like I said, I've always been a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. So it's like, if we were to pick that apart, then why would I be somebody who has struggled with suicidal ideation as an attempt survivor, but I have all this faith? And I agree with what Ruth said. Faith is almost, if you were to use it like a sense of hope, that something is good going to come, and if you can hold on to that. And for somebody who maybe has lost their faith, because I think it's in everybody, but maybe has lost sight of that, we need to find things that are more tangible, maybe more of a physical for them to hold on to long enough to find that faith again, long enough to find a little bit of light, a little bit of hope, until all of a sudden that becomes their guiding force again.
Right.
I think it's also what might be leading them towards the despair for the suicide. Because like in my mom's note that she left, she was pretty clear. She was physically ill at the time, and she felt like she was being a burden on our family, and that she was holding my sister and I back from our education. And my dad had just gotten a great new job, and she felt like he couldn't focus on that. So her reason for doing it was more like, I'm doing this for you, so I think her faith was more like, I'm going to be the good mom. I'm no longer useful here to this situation. So I'm going to step back so they can go ahead and have a good life. So I think that was an act of faith that for her, that we would go on and have good lives. And 2 out of 3, she was right. But
3 out of 3.
Bad
3 out of 3. Really.
That's a theory. Anyway, so I think it's hard to quantify the word faith, only because it's so personal for every person and what they believe about themselves and how they fulfill their role in this world. I think it's a huge part of it.
Faith has always been a question for me in I think when we talked about, I did an episode about depression, and I have no understanding of chemical medical depression. Like, I don't understand. I can't get in the shower. Like, my brain doesn't compute. I understand that it is real and that it happens, that it is for real for that person. But my brain goes, seriously, you can't get in the shower? Come on, 2 feet on the floor and then 1 foot in front of the other. Come on, what's the problem? And I mentally understand it is actually impossible for that person. But my genetic makeup, like you were talking about, suicidal people have this kind of genetic wiring, or I think that's what you were saying. It's that way for depression too. And for people who have these tendencies, suicidal thoughts or ideations, understand our conversation. People like me do not. And they go, well, you just don't do that. Most of the public goes, yeah, you just don't do that. You just don't make that choice. So part of having conversations about it is so people who, like me, with someone who's depressed goes, yeah, you just get in the shower. It's not brain surgery.
Right.
And understand that's not exactly, we're not all apples to apples.
Right.
We're not. And
no.
That's part of the problem in the overall understanding of mental health or even suicide. Because I think when at least like I was talking about before, when Bert's friend killed himself several years ago, the questions that just run in your brain of what was your responsibility is so torturous. And if we could just come to a place where you go, this has nothing whatsoever to do with you.
Exactly.
This has,
and I can tell you that for certain, it had nothing to do with anybody else.
Right.
That moment was about me and feeling that was it, that I just could not live with the pain and the sorrow and just this darkness any longer. I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, just exhausted. And I need rest, and this is the only way I'm going to get it. So it had nothing to do with anybody else.
That's an amazing statement, that you were exhausted. Because I think my friend who wrote the letter, was exhausted. He was just exhausted. And that letter just broke my heart, because exactly what you described, I think, is what he had exhausted every possibility for getting help. And he was just exhausted. And
like your example of getting in the shower. So your brain goes to, actually getting your feet on the floor, getting you to the shower. But a depressed person will have that conversation. Same words. What's the big deal? It's one foot, other foot, get in there. And it'll keep going for 20 minutes, for 30 minutes, for 2 hours, for 4 hours. Now it's 3 days later and you're still not in the shower. That's why.
My brain goes, but
because your body goes, no, because. And there's no reason. There's no logical reason why you won't get in the shower. You just can't, whatever. And you're pinned down, and it's physically entrapping. But that's what I'm saying. That's the exhausting part, because it's not like we don't know these things.
And it's not like you probably don't. And I have no guilt about being in the bed.
I can tell you right now, I could go jump in the shower, no problem.
Right. But I would imagine it perpetuates this self-hate spiral.
Totally.
Makes it worse.
Right.
And then,
yes.
Right? That's what, if I'm imagining what it would be like,
right.
it would be like a hamster wheel of hate.
Right. And that's where the exhaustion and all this despair comes in, because it's it's all in my head. So how am I going to get out of it?
Right. Sounds terrible.
Right.
It is.
It's like you're spinning what are those acts that spin plates?
Oh,
yeah. Just don't go anywhere. And you're just kind of, and it really, it's becomes physically exhausting. Like you just have no energy to even try to live life if you wanted to. So, yeah.
That's not fun.
It's not.
Well, I know when I had postpartum, my postpartum looked like rage. And rage has a lot of action in it. So I never could not get out of bed, but I could break the toilet lid on the toilet. No problem. And I feel much better.
You are so speaking to me. What's interesting is they've actually, I guess postpartum can actually start when you're actually pregnant. And I could remember the day. Yeah, I remember the day I was 4 months pregnant. And I remember the day, and I think I was having symptoms of rage. And that's exactly what I experienced with my son for years.
Rage.
Quietly.
It's a rage.
It was rage. I was just angry.
This is a whole different episode.
If you look at
I could be in on this one too. Not pregnant, but totally on rage.
About the rage? Oh, honey, I rage all that.
I always end up hurting myself though. I'll break my toe when I kick something. It only enrages me further.
Oh my God. Right. Now you're in your cycle, your vicious cycle.
Right. I've been looking for someone, Dawnel, to talk about postpartum, because one of my good friends is a therapist who one of her specialties is postpartum. And I was like, I need to find a mom who's had it legit for real. I have one mom, but she's kind of hesitant to come on and talk about it. So if you're interested, Dawnel, maybe we'll do another podcast with my friend who's a therapist and talk about postpartum, because postpartum is so, excuse my French, so fucking real. And it is, I remember having it and watching myself have it and knowing this was not real and not being able to controlling and watching going, you're actually breaking your own toilet because instead of your child, I wanted to throw my kid. And instead I went in the bathroom, locked the door and broke my toilet. And then I was able to go back and parent. And I finally, after I broke the toilet, went to the doctor and was like, I think something's wrong with me. I broke my toilet. And she went, oh, honey, you need some medication. And so I got, she just put me on birth control and it righted my boat. It was all my body needed. Now I know that's not the case for a lot of bodies, but for mine, my body just needed some estrogen. I don't too much testosterone.
Well, and isn't that the case with like all mental health? So postpartum, anxiety, depression, bipolar, the whole list, ADHD, all of it. All of the treatment is going to be different. Totally. All of the therapy looks different. So, as a coach, I try to help people create this toolkit and it's going to look different. Sure, I'll share things that have worked for me and we can try it out and see if it works for you. But essentially everybody's toolkit looks different and some need medication and some, so I think that's powerful. And yes, postpartum is 1,000% real. Oh my gosh. And I have to say that the effects of it are lasting because I will tell you, and I know this is for another show, but I can tell you that my daughter who's older, she got most of. And so we're a place where we're trying to kind of rebuild what that relationship is supposed to look like because there's a lot of moments of trauma for her.
Right. It's scary. We definitely should do an episode about that, Dawnel. So I'll be emailing you later.
Okay.
But back to the topic at hand. Okay. So not to disclose too much about why Ruth gave this talk to my group of moms, which was great and helpful. And the discussion I had with my daughter the other night that led to the saying I'd traumatize you at some point was directly related to what we had talked about on that talk, right? So obviously everyone knows I have teenagers. And our question was, if someone in their group talks about suicide, how do you handle that as a parent? How do you handle it as a parent of a child who talks about suicide? And how do you handle it as the parent of a child whose friend talks about it? Because I know it's what you had said in our PowerPoint Zoom meeting, Ruth, was that, you always have to take it seriously. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, sometimes it's not serious. And right. Sometimes it's a call for help for something else, or it's an indicator that there's another underlying mental health problem or crisis going on. Mm-hmm. And how in the world do you suss that out?
Right.
Tell me, ladies, how do you suss that out?
You don't.
You don't.
Get somebody who can.
Right.
Dawnel,
what a beautiful picture. Was that you? Beautiful picture.
She's a beauty queen.
Oh gosh, thank you. Sorry, I thought I had my phone on Do Not Disturb. So, that's a tough one. That is a tough one. I feel like I have both sides. I can tell you that in my family, we are very much an open, let's talk about it family. So my kids know that if they ever have an issue, if they are ever feeling down or whatever the case may be, they absolutely can come to me. And I will ask questions and I will dig a little bit deeper. And is it scary as a parent to think that they could then answer me, honestly, and be really in a dark place and full of pain? Absolutely. But the flip side of that is if I don't, mm-hmm. I can't even talk about it, to be honest with you. Well,
what questions would you ask? What questions would you ask?
This is real and raw. If you're ready,
I'm ready. If you're ready.
Okay. So my son, he's 11 and he struggles with ADHD. And I would say within about the last year or so, he has said things like, I'm just going to go kill myself.
Oh,
And it's like, oh, I mean, every inch of I can't even, I mean, to even describe that as a parent, to hear that is beyond. But I'm able to, I'll ask things like, did something happen today with me? Did mom do something? Did dad do something? Did sister do something? Did something happen at school? So I get very specific. Well, what did that person say to you? And what was your response? So I get him talking about whatever the situation is that led him to think that. And then we brainstorm ways. And I let him know up front, I get it. I understand it. And I'm sorry that your mind took you to that place. You have to know that's not an option, but let's figure out an option that is going to work. Let's find some way that that we can get through whatever the situation is. Mm-hmm. So it's just getting them to talk and really, really digging deeper into what the actual issue could be to understand maybe what took them to that place or whatever the case may be. And I think my daughter has a friend that I am talking with. She had reached out to this group of friends. And of course, my daughter knows what I do. So she said, Mom, is there any way you would talk to her? And I said, I will, but I'm going to let you know right up front. And I'm going to let your friend know right up front. If this is going to go to a place where I think there's actual concern, I will involve her parents.
Right.
I will involve a teacher. And I think it's really, really important for people to know that they've got to then turn to somebody. So if it's a friend of a friend, they need to know that they take it serious and that they need to get help. They need to find somebody either, through school or whatever the situation may be, that they need to turn to and say, I'm really concerned about my friend. This is what's been said. And I'd rather make sure that they're okay and have them angry at me or not even be my friend anymore, but make sure they're still around.
Right. That was one of my takeaways from Ruth's Zoom, was that I was like, in speaking to my daughter about what I'd learned, I was very upfront with her and told her I went to this Zoom about how to deal with someone who may be suicidal in your teenage group and how to deal with your own child where that other teenager is concerned. And I just laid out everything I'd learned and said,
beautiful.
So this is how my parenting is going to function where this is concerned. Because I can't go to a seminar and learn something and go, yeah, I'm not using that. Well, that doesn't make sense. So one of the things I learned is that you may be able to drive, but you're not qualified to deal with someone who comes to you and says, I'm going to kill myself. You turn around and find the closest trusted adult you can find and tell them. And if that adult can't help, that adult can find someone who can. But you are not qualified to be her counselor. You are not qualified to save her. You are not qualified to be her mental health specialist. You are qualified to be her friend. And that is all you are qualified for. So I love that you think that you can save the world. I love that part of who you are. That is inaccurate information in this situation. In this situation, you are not qualified. And thank God you're not. So just get help. Tell somebody. Right. And you don't have to tell me. I keep saying it doesn't need to be me, but it needs to be an adult that you trust. And I can name 8 right now who you could tell half of them don't even know this young lady and could still figure out how to help. So I think laying out that information before, they had a crisis moment with this young lady, and which is what initiated this need for a Zoom call. And so now that we've had this education to really say, here's the plan. Here are the people you can go to. Here's what you need to do. Here's when you hear this from her, go get somebody. And you know what? Something happened after I'd had that conversation with her friend, and nobody went and got an adult. And I pulled my daughter out and went, this is not how this works. This is when you should have gone and gotten an adult. You should not have tried to deal with any of this. This is when you know, okay, I think that this is above my pay grade. I kept saying that. You just need to know when it is above your pay grade. And when someone is in a mental health crisis, like a full-blown panic attack, that's not your bag. Go get an adult.
Right.
Well, because also, I mean, lay it out to her. Like if it hadn't worked out okay at this particular situation and the girl had ended up hurting herself or even dying, how would all the friends have felt then?
Yes, I did not go to
years old, having to live with that for the rest of your life, knowing that, no, it's not your fault if she killed herself, but you didn't actively help her when you could,
Right.
And you knew you should. So that's, not to try and like guilt trip on people.
No, that's really powerful.
That's just the reality of what could happen. It's one way or the other. Either she's mad at you for getting somebody to help her or she's dead. And you're mad at yourself forever.
Right.
Yep. And I make sure, I think especially with teenagers, because they do want to protect that relationship and keep the honesty and the trust and all of that. That's their tribe.
Yeah.
But I always be sure. And I told my daughter for sure, but in every class that I have the opportunity to educate in, that's one of the very first things I say. You rather have this person hate you and be alive. That's what you could walk around and live with, the fact that they're still alive. You can either mend the friendship or not. It doesn't matter, but they're alive.
Right.
Versus, trying to, like you said, take this on. And this is heavy and this is deep. And sometimes they need more than just a conversation, right? They need actual help. So thank you for doing that with your daughter and the friends. That's really powerful.
It was great night, Ruth. You guys did a great job.
I'm glad you guys put it together. But I also say to people, like, I'd have a hard time working on a crisis line, and listening to people because that I'm depressed. Like I'd be going, I see, I can understand, whereas like my heart's with the survivors because that's what I know, so we all have our different skill sets too. Right. And it's not, I know I wouldn't be helpful in that circumstance. So I'd never put myself in that circumstance.
Right.
And that's what I think everybody needs, the kids need to learn too. It's like, they just don't have the skills. And it's not like they're not coming from a great place of wanting to help their friend.
Right.
But it's just not helpful. And that's what they need to understand. That it's not.
That was a brilliant illustration, Ruth, of I can't be there with you on the crisis hotline because that is damaging me, or I'm too aligned with it, or whatever. I'm helpful over here.
Yeah.
That's a great lesson. That's a great perspective I should present to my daughters, is that not everybody helps in the same way. Some people are meant to do what you do, and some people are meant to be on the crisis line.
Right.
One's not better or worse than the other. They're just different.
Exactly.
And that has to do with your wiring a little bit too. And what you're wired for. I would have a really hard time on the hotline also. I think I'd be like, oh, where do you live? I'll be there in 5 minutes. I'm coming over. You want to make
some muffins? I'll bring your dog to pet. I got you covered.
Exactly. I wouldn't be able to just listen and be compassionate. I'd be like, how do we fix it? How do we fix it? So
like, that sucks.
Yeah. There was one more really important thing that I learned from that Zoom, and I've lost it. I should have written it down when it came in my brain. Something else that I said to my daughter was, I understand that you want to help your friend, and I think that's very noble, but my job is to take care of you. As much as I would like to help her, I am not her parent. I am your parent. So if I feel like you're in a situation that's unhealthy for you, I will be removing you from that situation, not to the discredit or the discounting of your friend, but because my job is you. Now, I can circle around with other parents and help the other kid, but that's none of your business. I actually said those words. That's none of your business. Your business is what I am parenting with you. And what I think, I don't know if you said this directly in the Zoom, but I got this in my brain. sometimes these coping skills rub off on the group. So if the young lady threatens suicide, doesn't go through with it, threatens it again, doesn't go through with it, what she's doing is, and I mean this is going to come out terrible, so please be patient with me. That's a form of emotional terrorism. She's holding them hostage by saying, I'm going to go bounce. Now they're all in crisis. Now they're all in panic. Now they're all focused on her. Mm-hmm. And that's not healthy. Now, removing the suicide piece from it, right? If it were something else, if she had some other mental issue that wasn't, she's going to die from this, and it caused them to hold the group hostage, that's very unhealthy. So then if my daughter starts doing Hail Mary passes with her own stuff and holding me hostage, you see, it rubs off on the group. I explained that to her too. This is how this young lady is coping. This is how she's saying, I need help. And it's not healthy. It's not healthy for her, first of all, because if she's serious and she means it, that's a crisis. If she's using this to scream for help, she is in crisis, whether she's serious about killing herself or not. Either option, she's in total crisis. And she's demanding full attention from the group immediately and until she's done.
Right.
And that's not healthy. So now you come home and have a similar behavior with a similar, it must be this right now. And I go, that's not healthy. And where could you have learned that? Because we don't do that behavior in our house and our family culture. So now I have to separate you from that for a different reason. And I think that's the piece she actually understood. I was like, it's the same with people who use drugs to cope with their emotions. If someone's smoking weed because they have anxiety, you have anxiety, you go, I'm going to start smoking weed. Well, guess what? That's not the healthy way to deal with anxiety. But you see someone else use a coping mechanism, you go, that looks like a good idea. So then you probably shouldn't be running around with that person using that broken coping mechanism. Or you should at least be able to recognize that coping mechanism is broken. Doesn't mean you're not friends with that person, but it means that you're able to compartmentalize how they function versus what's healthy if they're unhealthy.
No, I think it sounds like you've explained it very clearly to her.
Yeah.
Very specifically.
I don't know if she liked it.
Well, of course not. Of course not.
Among other things.
But I love that you recognize there were different pieces in your explanation that resonated with her.
Yes,
right?
there definitely were. And she didn't like it. At the end of my conversation, I said, I can tell that you're not happy with me. And she said, no, I'm not happy, but I understand.
Right.
I was like, okay.
Well, isn't that the way of the teenager anyway?
Yeah. Then let's sleep on it.
Yeah.
Until the next day. And at the end of the day, you have to set healthy boundaries as a parent. And you have to be the one that says, hey, this part's not healthy.
But you didn't tell her who you had that conversation with about suicide parameters, did you? Because I don't want her to hate me.
No, I didn't tell her. No.
I'm kidding.
She wouldn't hate you anyway, Ruth.
Joking.
No way. Good. No, I don't think I did.
Oh my gosh.
I don't think I did. Not for any reason. Just to tell her that I took a class with some certified people. They worked for the National Suicide Prevention. I don't even know if I said it right. If I made it up, I made it sound really official.
Yeah, she knows Anne-Marie. I did it with Anne-Marie since she's a teacher. I'm like, she can let you know what the kids are saying.
Right.
And she can also let you know what the resources are in schools, because the schools do have resources. And, that's because I was even thinking more when I was first approached, maybe the moms could get together and do something. But Anne-Marie was like, no, this isn't up to the moms. It's not, it's not their business. You get it to the next person. You get it to the school, and it's the school's business.
Because we're not qualified either.
Right.
I'm not qualified to handle that. As much as my heart, I feel so bad for her that she doesn't have support at home, this young lady, and that in the resources they've reached out in their public school system hasn't been effective. So I don't know if she's not paired with the right person in the school system or if something's not communicated. I have no idea. But So that is a good question for people who are listening. What are someone's resources? If you have a child who is suicidal and you don't have a gazillion dollars and can go to therapy, what resources are there?
Well, I mean, there's plenty, like the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. On their website, they have a list, page to go, like if you want to help somebody in crisis, if you're in crisis, different. So they send you to different things, individual therapy is great. Group, there's a lot of group support sessions around. There's different kinds. There's books, there's movies, there's different things depending on what calls to you. And again, a lot of mental health places do things on a sliding scale if you don't have a lot of money. Dawnel, do you know specific places around here?
I was going to say, I definitely think looking within your particular area. So for example, out where I live, we've actually created a website that is specific to our valley. And we have resources broken down for youth, for all the different communities within our area. And what they're specific in. So what are the different issues that they will work with? What are the different age groups that they work with? So I would definitely, I know ours is connected to like our city website. Mm-hmm. So I would definitely recommend, starting with a city website and seeing if there's any sort of resource list there. But one in particular that I just absolutely love, and I think it's so powerful for our teens, is actually teenline.org. They're actually based out of Los Angeles, but they are national. And what happens is you can text, email, or call.
Wow.
And the teen is then connected to another teen. So they work with ages anywhere from 13 to 18, but you're connected with somebody within that age group that has been highly trained to talk with you or to text with you or email, whatever the case may be. And really cool is they will actually follow up with you. So if I were to call in today and this is my struggle and I'm explaining my story, they will actually ask, hey, can I check on you in a couple days? And they will follow up with that person. And they kind of establish this relationship that I just think is really cool because it's, age to age, which I think for teens, they really want that connection. Parents and adults don't know anything. So to be able to, to be able to speak with somebody that's your own age who kind of gets what you could be going through, the times and all of that stuff. So that's a really powerful one. And they are national. I think their call center is West Coast time, Pacific time, but I want to say it's like 2 to 7 or 3 to 7 every day, something like that. But I would definitely, I recommend that to a lot of the teens that I get to work with.
Teenline.org?
Teenline.org.
So I wonder what resources in the school. I guess you could go to any teacher or principal. Could you report? What happens if you report to like a fireman? Anything? Hey, I have this kid who's suicidal. Are they an automatic reporter or?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
That's a really good question. I'm not sure.
Police officer.
Well, and I think with the schools, what's difficult is a lot of the schools they don't have a plan in place.
Mm.
So I would definitely say the counseling unit, if there is one, would be a place to start. And then, I would go up from there. I think every school's a little bit different. Every district's a little bit different. Some have policies in place and procedures, and some have, been able to get that out to their students and to the parents and things. But I don't know that, unfortunately, I don't think it's readily available in every school.
Isn't that a shame?
It is. It is. I really think it needs to be a part of curriculum, to be honest.
Oh, there's so much that needs to be part of curriculum. I think high school.
That's another
exactly. Oh, that's a whole nother. Believe me. Would you like to do a podcast called Leanne's Soapbox? Because that's what it is. Education, I freaking have a lot of opinions. You have an ADHD child. I have a dyslexic child. Let me tell you something. It's a broken system for anybody that doesn't learn exactly the way you're supposed to learn. And if you don't, you are shit and you're made to feel like shit. Even under the best circumstances, you're made to feel like shit. It's terrible. It's criminal. And there's so much of our population that's left behind. So this No Child Left Behind bullshit they put in place destroyed so much of what was working. Oh, I have so much to say about that. Different episode, Dawnel, different episode. Okay. So suicide prevention. Is there anything you can do as someone who is not suicidal? Like I was asking before, like my therapist said, if someone makes their mind up, there's just really nothing you can do.
Well, you can try. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, you go.
You.
I'm so stubborn. You are so going to speak right now.
All right. I mean, you can always try, and you should always try, and you have to assume that maybe you're the only one that's going to try. So, I mean, the best thing you can do is really just start a conversation. I mean, if you're worried about someone and thinking, I wonder if there's something going on, chances are they're probably at a crisis point if they're letting that much show. And it's just, the best thing you can do is just directly ask somebody, are you thinking of suicide, or are you thinking of killing yourself? Don't be coy. Don't think, are you going to hurt yourself? Just be abrupt. Say, I'm worried about you because I've noticed a change in your behavior, or I'm worried about you because I know, so many life events have come down on you all within the last month, or whatever. Just be open and tell them why you're worried. Tell them that you are worried, and tell them what you're worried about, using those words, because that will give them permission, if they're ready to talk to you, to use that word back. Or if they're not ready to talk to you, and like a teenager might get mad that you asked, at least in their brain somewhere, they're like, somebody noticed, and it might open up them to have permission to talk to somebody else, like to find a therapist or something. So there's no harm in trying, in asking, in worrying about somebody. And then, it really is just about starting a conversation and then being willing to help find them help.
Right.
They say they need it.
So what would you say are the signs? Are there any signs?
Am I still going down now?
Go ahead. You're amazing.
I mean, I always say the biggest sign, that they come in three forms. One's change in talk. So saying things like, I'm worthless, I can't do this anymore, I'm done with it all, things that we've all said or heard today. There's, what's the other one? There's behavior. And that could be any kind of different behavior. Like, to me, it's a drastic change in that person's behavior. So if somebody's really introverted, rarely leaves the house, suddenly they're going to parties every night, something may be up. Or vice versa. They're a partier and now they're home in their room all the time, something may be up. So it depends on that person and what different behaviors you've seen. Plus, it can be mood swings. And like we were talking, rage and irritability are a huge part of this that people don't always look to. People think depression is sitting in a corner being sad. It's not. It can be these other things. So like I said, any kind of thing, really different behavior. And it's talk, behavior, and what's the third thing?
And mood. You got it.
I just lumped it in with behavior. Yeah. So there we go. So those are kind of the warning signs. And then talk about risk, what to do in risk. Dawnel. If you think someone's in crisis, Dawnel.
Tossing to you, Dawnel.
You're doing so well. I just love listening to you and chatting with you. So they talk about risk factors. Some of that has to do with environment. So when they talk environment, we could, home life. It could be somebody who recently lost a job or is getting a divorce, or so environmental things definitely play a role. That history that I talked about before is considered a risk factor. And now, see, I forgot the third one. Environmental history and I totally just drew a blank. Ridiculous.
Oh my God.
What about someone giving away their possessions?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
That's a behavior. Yeah. So those are some of the things like that somebody's really in crisis. Really talking about it, talking about a plan. If you find evidence that they've been looking up ways to find a means. And that's really the key factor when somebody is in crisis is to separate them from a means. So like one of the things AFSP does is we have a program about gun safety now, not taking your guns away, but just, putting a lock in them, because even in that 15 seconds it can take to find the key, put the key in the lock, open it up, the crisis mind may have shifted or somebody might have walked in the room. So it's really key to, just prevent somebody who you think is in trouble from being around dangerous means and separating them from them. And then it's about getting people help. Once you discover somebody is in crisis, say, it's which can be from, finding them the number for a therapist, taking them to the first appointment to a therapist, or taking them to an emergency room or calling 911 if it's that drastic. It's all important, and it all depends on where the situation is. You can never overreact, I don't think. You can underreact for sure. And then again, the one thing to remember though is if you're there and you do find somebody help or whatever, you're not responsible for keeping them alive forever. Your job was to get them help and get them away from that terrible situation at that moment. But you can't take it on to that you're their sole savior.
That's a great thing to say, because I think most people would feel, okay, now this is my job.
Right. No, absolutely not.
Because you're only responsible for yourself on this planet. As much as we are responsible for our children, but really not entirely. There's only, you keep them safe and warm and fed until a certain age. But after that, they are responsible for themselves, hopefully, built on the values you've given them. But they don't have to. They're not required to agree with every value you have or every boundary you set. And at a certain point, they are no longer yours, And it's the same with your friends and your spouses and everybody. There's only so much you can be responsible for. And that goes for bipolar. That goes for any other type of mental illness. At a certain point, you have to be separated and you have to allow them to go their own path. Even if this sounds terrible, but even if the path is tragic, there's a certain point where you have to allow them their own path and help them hopefully not go tragic. But like my therapist said, some people you just can't, there's nothing you can do. So
I took part in a question and answer recently, and somebody asked, can you use guilt to keep someone alive? Can you? And I'm like, well, I mean, maybe, but you probably shouldn't, because wouldn't the goal in wanting someone to be alive be them to want to be alive? Like, they already have enough on their plate, which is why they're going down this path. So adding guilt on top of that probably isn't the thing that's, going to turn it around for them. And that's what it is. It's, only there in their mind and they have to live with it. So you can only take things so far for another person anywhere.
Yeah, that's very wise and very sad. It would be nice if you could just go, and I'm going to help you forever, and it work, because it just doesn't work. I mean, growing up with someone who I believe is mentally ill, there were so many times where I was like, I can fix this. I can make this work. I can make these adjustments. I can carry this burden. I can keep trying. And at a certain point, I was like, why? My mother is not even meeting me sort of halfway. She's going like, what are you doing? So why am I doing this? Because clearly the other person doesn't want it. So then...
Or isn't able to take it.
Isn't able to take it is more accurate.
Mm-hmm.
That is right. He's not able to manage this shift at all.
And what kind of damage did it do to you in all that time you were trying?
Exactly right. It did. And not to be someone, because Bert used to say before he had any experience with my mom, he used to say, I don't understand why you can't just figure this out. Much like I say, I don't understand why you just can't put one foot in front of the other and get in the shower.
Right.
Sometimes there's just no figuring it out. And that's hard to live with as the person on the other side of the person who can't figure it out. So be it suicide or whatever. If you're on the other side going, I couldn't give them some of my strength, experience, knowledge, wisdom, fortitude, whatever it is that they didn't have enough of to persevere. It's hard for that other person to say, oh, well, not that you ever say, oh, well, but you know what I mean? To say, that's on you, buddy. It's really hard to get to that place and not feel responsible.
But you're not doing it out of meanness or disinterest or whatever. It's just the way it has to be sometimes.
Yeah.
I think.
Ladies, anything else we need to say about suicide? Anything you want to wrap up with?
Don't do it.
Don't do it. Ask for help. Get help.
Call Dawnel. She'll help you.
Teenline.org.
Teenline.org. I just want to remind those that are listening to reach in, because for somebody who has been in that place before, a lot of times somebody who is struggling is not going to reach out. They're not going to ask for help. They are surrounded by guilt and shame and all of these other things that are keeping them in that place. So just keep reaching in, just keep checking in on your loved ones, genuinely and without judgment, and just be there to listen.
That's great.
I always tell people, if you need to say something, talk. And if somebody needs to talk to you, just listen.
Mm-hmm.
Great advice. I think this was a good talk. I learned a lot.
Good.
I thank you. I thank you and Ruth both for coming together and recognizing just how important this is. I think, again, in this season of life we're living through, this is the time. If we're going to start breaking down these walls and things that are up, this is the time to do it. And I think people are more open perhaps than they ever have been before. Mm-hmm. And so I just so appreciate you putting the light on this. I think it's so critical.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing, being brave and sharing your story, not just to me, but to in general, to, anybody you meet on the street, to be able to share. Mm-hmm. These harder experiences makes it easier for everybody, right? If we're able to share, it makes it easier for everybody.
Yeah, that's my hope.
Me too.
Yeah.
Until we talk about postpartum and the broken educational system, Dawnel.
I'll have fun with that.
I'll be calling you twice.
Good. I'm here.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to stay on the Zoom and do an intro with Halston. So nice to meet you, Dawnel.
You as well. Thank you.
I feel like I've known you forever. And thank you, Ruth.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Sure.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.